42,000 BC. No medicine, no protection. Your first 24 hours. With the Neanderthals, the spear snaps clean, right at the base of the obsidian tip, just as Caro drives it through the shoulder of a cave hyena that has decided, tonight, this camp belongs to it. The crack of the shaft is the loudest sound you have ever heard. And then the hyena screams, and that is worse. Forget everything you think you know. Forget the museum dioramas with their slack-jawed brutes hunched over a fire. And you are standing in the Neander Valley sometime around 42,000 years before you were born. And the first thing that hits you is the smell. Not the romance of wood smoke and turned earth. The smell is rot. Somewhere upwind, a mammoth carcass has been working for 3 days, and the whole valley breathes it in like a second atmosphere. Your eyes water. Your stomach clenches. This is the first lesson the Neanderthals teach you, and they do not say a word. You survived this smell. Not once. Every day. Now let me tell you what the next 24 hours actually look like. Because I have spent 30 years arguing with colleagues who have spent their careers reading Neanderthals from a distance. I have excavated in the Dordogne with cracked fingernails and a head cold. I have held the skull of a child who lived 60,000 years ago in my bare hands. There is something they never teach you in graduate school. Something the journals cannot carry. Bone remembers pressure. Bone remembers use. And if you hold enough of it, bone starts to talk. So, dawn. You wake before the light arrives. Not because you choose to, but because the cave's mouth faces northeast, and a knife of air cuts through it at first dark that your body, even 60 millennia of evolution later, still knows how to fear. The cave floor is not the bare limestone of the textbooks. It is layered. Decades of occupation have built up a living stratum of compressed grass, ash, bone fragments, and hair. Mostly animal, but some human. You are sleeping on the accumulated record of your family's survival. Your bed is a fossil in progress. The person closest to you, the one the team and I have taken to calling Mara because the skeleton we eventually found of her showed she had survived a serious pelvic fracture during what was almost certainly a difficult birth. That person is already awake. She has been awake since the hyena screamed. She sits at the cave mouth, absolutely motionless, listening to the dark with her entire body. I want you to understand what her skull looked like when we found her. The supraorbital torus, the heavy brow ridge you have seen caricatured on 1,000 magazine covers, creates a physical shelf over the eye socket. Modern functional morphology strongly suggests it was part of a structural adaptation for managing the mechanical stress of using the teeth as tools. Mara used her teeth constantly. We know because the wear patterns on her incisors tell a very specific story about repetitive loading from one side, consistent with hide working. She was right-handed. She had a healed crack on her lower right canine, the kind that comes from biting down hard on something that did not yield. The fossils do not tell us everything, but my gut says she bit through a sinew cord in the dark and felt the tooth give, and did not stop working. By the time actual light bleeds across the valley floor, the group has been moving for an hour. There are 11 of them. That is not an arbitrary number. Paleodemographic modeling of Neanderthal sites from across Western Europe consistently suggests group sizes between 10 and 30 individuals, with the smaller, more mobile units appearing in the more resource-sparse environments. This is October, deep in what we now call the MIS-3 interstadial, a period of brutal climatic instability where warm pulses alternated with cold snaps, sometimes within a single human generation. The animals they depend on have been moving erratically. The group is lean. 2 of the 11 are children. One of the children has a cough. That cough. I need you to hear that cough. It is wet and low, and it comes from a chest that has been fighting something for 2 weeks. There is no willow bark tea here. And before you correct me, yes, while I know the evidence from Shanidar 4 suggested possible medicinal plant use, and yes, that interpretation has been disputed and revised and picked apart by people who were not there and have never had to decide with your hands what a cluster of pollen grains inside a Neanderthal burial actually means. The fossils do not tell us everything, but I have stood in that cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I will tell you plainly, the deliberate placement of a body is not nothing. And they knew something about plants. How much they knew, I cannot prove. But that child coughing in the cold October air of 42,000 BC had someone watching them. Someone who had watched before and knew what watching meant. The morning's work is stone. I want to explain the Levallois technique to you, not as an academic exercise, but as a survival imperative, because your life, right now, in this valley, depends on your ability to do it correctly. You start with a nodule of flint, not just any flint. The individual who manages the group's lithic resources, and yes, they had such a person. Sites like Abri Peroni in the Dordogne have yielded specialized bone-retouching tools that indicate not just napping, but a deliberate 2-stage process requiring a level of planning that the old models of Neanderthal cognition simply cannot accommodate. That person has already selected the cores. The quality of the raw material has been assessed. Some of it has been transported 20 kilometers. You prepare the core by shaping its dorsal surface into a domed tortoise-shell form. Every flake you remove from the perimeter is deliberate. You are building a prepared platform, a ramp of geometry, so that when you strike the final blow, the flake that detaches will be predetermined in its shape and size. You see, Levallois is not just napping. It is projection. It is the manufacturing of an object that exists in your mind before it exists in the stone. Standard archaeology calls this prepared core technology and moves on to the next paragraph. But if you have ever tried to replicate it, if you have ever sat for an afternoon with a nodule of flint and a hard hammerstone and tried to produce a Levallois point that is actually usable as a hunting weapon, you will understand why it took the first Homo sapiens researchers who encountered Neanderthal tool assemblages weeks to accept that these were not crude imitations of something more sophisticated. They were the thing itself. The hunting starts mid-morning. Caro, the one whose spear broke last night, and whose shoulder carries a mass of scar tissue from a previous encounter, I prefer not to think too hard about. Caro leads the tracking group. 4 individuals. They move through the valley's edge timber with a lateral spacing that I recognize, after years of watching contemporary hunter-gatherer groups in field conditions, as a deliberate flanking formation. They are not chasing. They are steering. The bison herd they have been reading for 3 days is grazing the eastern slope. Wind direction observed and accounted for. The approach is downwind, tight to the tree line, unhurried. Neanderthals were ambush hunters. The biomechanical evidence in the skeletal record, the patterns of trauma that show up again and again across European specimens, injuries consistent with close-quarters animal contact, suggests they closed distance before they threw anything. They did not hurl spears from 20 meters. They got close enough to feel the animal's body heat, and then they drove the point in. That is terrifying. It is also extraordinarily effective if you survive it. A standard archaeology has sometimes framed this as evidence of limited cognitive capacity, an inability to develop the long-range projectile technology that Homo sapiens would later deploy. I think that interpretation is exactly backward. What it looks like to me after 30 years is a group of hunters who understood animal behavior with a granularity that made long-range guesswork unnecessary. Why throw from far away when you know precisely where the animal is going to step next? By midday, there is meat. The butchery is systematic. Specific cut mark patterns at sites across the Iberian Peninsula and into Central Europe show not random hacking, but a consistent, efficient defleshing sequence that follows the major muscle groups. They knew anatomy the way a surgeon knows anatomy, through repetition and consequence. The marrow extraction is complete. Every long bone gets cracked. Calories are finite. A waste is not something this group understands as a concept because they have never lived in conditions where it was possible. The elder, the one whose healed femur fracture, tells us he walked with a pronounced limp for the last decade or more of his life, and was fed and carried by others through a recovery that must have lasted months. The elder does not butcher today. His hands are occupied with something else. He is working a length of yew wood with a small flint burin, and the tool marks he leaves are deliberate, longitudinal, consistent with the shaping of a shaft. This is not unlike the worked wooden spears recovered from Schöningen in Germany, 300,000 years old and aerodynamically balanced, the kind of object that does not emerge from a brain running on instinct. The kind of object that requires you to imagine a future hunt from the position of a present workshop. His hands do not shake. They are enormous, thick-fingered, and precise. And the afternoon brings rain. Cold, lateral rain that comes in off a landscape that will eventually be called England and does not understand that it has not yet been named. The children retreat to the cave interior. The coughing child is given proximity to the fire and something to chew that I cannot identify from this distance, but that the adults clearly prepared with some deliberation. I am watching this, and I cannot tell you, hand on my field notes, whether it is medicine or comfort or simply food. Maybe they are the same thing. Maybe they always were. The pregnant hunter, and yes, she is pregnant. The skeletal morphology of the pelvic remains we associate with mid-gestation activity patterns is contentious, but present in the literature. She did not stop working when the rain started. She is scraping a hide with a side scraper whose edge was retouched this morning. I watched Caro retouch it. The technique was practiced, automatic, the way you make coffee, the way you do anything you have done 10,000 times. She is cold. Her breath comes out in long, slow plumes, and she keeps working because the hide is not finished, and the hide matters more than the cold. Outside the cave, on a limestone ledge that will eventually be excavated by a French doctoral student whose name I know, someone has placed something. Several red deer teeth, pierced, arranged without obvious functional purpose. Standard archaeology, the careful, cautious version, would note the presence of perforated tooth ornaments at multiple Neanderthal sites across Europe, and remind us that interpretation is speculative. I agree, interpretation is speculative. But I have been awake since before dawn. I have smelled the rot and heard the cough, and watched the elder's hands move like a craftsman's hands. And I am no longer willing to call that arrangement of teeth unconscious. Something in this group reaches toward symbol, reaches toward the ineffable, reaches, if you will forgive a documentary filmmaker going momentarily soft, toward meaning. Night comes like a wall. They do not stay up late. The fire is managed, banked down rather than extinguished. The same fire management behavior visible in the ash layers at dozens of European sites, indicating not just fire use, but fire husbandry. An understanding that a resource kept alive is more valuable than one rebuilt from scratch.
You'll be all right.
The coughing child sleeps against Mara. The elder's breathing is audible across the cave, slow and deliberate. The breathing of someone who has decided to still be alive in the morning. Caro sits at the cave mouth again, where Mara sat at dawn, listening to the dark. They will wake tomorrow and do this again. And here is the thing that keeps me up at night. The thing that has kept me arguing in cold seminar rooms and hot field camps for 3 decades. They did this, some version of this, for 300,000 years. 300,000 years of stone tools and fire management and deliberate burial and pigment use and personal ornament and the systematic, intelligent exploitation of a brutal landscape. And then, somewhere around 40,000 years ago, they stopped. Not because they failed. The evidence does not support failure. What it supports is contact, overlap, interbreeding, and then a slow numerical dilution by a population of anatomically modern humans who were, frankly, not obviously smarter or better adapted in any single measurable way, just more numerous and more mobile and perhaps more willing to live on the margins. They did not vanish. That is the last thing I will tell you. Somewhere in the double helix of roughly 2% of every non-African human being alive on this planet tonight, Caro's arm is still throwing. Mara's hands are still working the hide in the rain. The elder's fingers still move with that terrible, a patient precision across the grain of a piece of wood that has not yet become anything but will. The fossils do not tell us everything, but some nights the DNA does.